We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hi, I'm Paula Scheffner, and welcome to Episode 0, My Favorite Orkan. The 22nd episode of the 5th season of Happy Days premiered on February 28th, 1978, and here's the IMDb synopsis. No one believes Richie's claims that he not only saw a flying saucer, but personally interviewed its pilot, an alien named Mork, who tried to take him back to planet Ork as an example of an average humdrum human. The director is Jerry Paris, the writer Joe Glauberg, special guest star Robin Williams. At that time, Happy Days was the second highest rated show. The first was Laverne and Shirley, which had spun off from Happy Days a couple years earlier. In between, in 1977, there was an unsuccessful Gary Marshall spinoff, Blansky's Beauties, which had Howard Cunningham's first cousin, Nancy Blansky, somehow travel to Vegas roughly 18 years later, unaged, and basically the same character. She managed Showgirls, and this was not a ratings or critical success by any means. I don't think that they were looking to spin off Mork and Mindy initially. From what I recall, Gary's 9-year-old son Scotty wanted a sci-fi element on Happy Days because of Star Wars, and flying saucers and aliens were a pretty 50s kind of thing. Not limited to the 50s, but it is one of those things we associate with that decade. So a spaceman showing up on Happy Days was somewhat appropriate, more far-fetched than Fonzie jumping over a shark, but it was presented in the It's Only a Dream motif, made popular by the Wizard of Oz movie, and later seen on Dallas and many, many other movies and TV shows. What they did not anticipate was that Robin Williams would be the phenomenon he became. He was not the first person under consideration for the role, but he did sit on his face during the audition or interview with Gary Marshall, and he was Mork. And I'll be talking more about Robin Williams as we go along, but just within the context of Happy Days, that's what we're looking at. I'm going to be approaching this episode somewhat as a Mork and Mindy episode, hence episode 0. Obviously, that was not the intention, but in retrospect, how is it as a Mork and Mindy episode? I am going to be rating each of the episodes on a 4-egg scale, although the Mork-egg connection is actually not present in this episode because he arrives on a flying saucer powered by baloney and looking somewhat like a weather balloon. This is not canonical for the future, but there's a lot here that will not mesh with what we'll see as the series progresses. Richie has been called average and humdrum and boring by his friends, not for the first time. So he goes home and has what is looking to be a boring, average, humdrum evening watching TV. He is not watching sci-fi. He is watching a Western. It's not clear if it's a Western movie or Western TV show. It's probably just the same reason that when Greg Brady goes to the drive-in, there's always a Western. It's always the same Western. I'm assuming it's a Paramount Western. It's probably the same Western on every 70s TV show. Mork shows up. We do not yet know he is Mork. Richie thinks that it's his prankster, jokester friend, Ralph Mouth, in a funny costume, using a funny voice that sounds like the Chipmunks. Mork is dressed in what would become his standard spacesuit. Certainly not the only outfit that he would be identified with, but it is the the alien version of Mork that we're looking at here. And it's interesting. The costume, because this was not supposed to go anywhere, it was not supposed to be reused as a part of a series costume, is from Star Trek. But they added some silver features. From a symbolic level, particularly if you go in a pagan symbolic level, it's really interesting because he's in red, which of course is associated with Mars, but also in the 50s, of course, with communism. But the pagan aspect, red is a very goddess color associated with women and blood. And then the silver features are associated with the moon. He has an inverted triangle, which is a yonic symbol. It also has queer connotations. They did not intend this in 1978. This is just me watching it now. This is not irrelevant, although it is far-fetched, because there is an ambiguity, including sexual ambiguity, associated with Mork, which does come up on this episode. Mork shows up. Richie quickly decides that this is a spaceman, although there is not immediate definite proof. Mork tells him that he means no harm, which turns out to be a lie. And when he's first there, he is wearing the helmet. You would expect a line about, oh, I can't breathe in this atmosphere. No, it's just to keep the rain off his head. It's not raining, but I guess it's just one of those precautions he took. He makes various cute little alien noises, including for the split finger handshake. And we get some terms defined as the episode goes on. He sits face down with his butt in the air, and then Richie has to teach him how to sit like a human, which is one of the first becoming human lessons. Most of those lessons will come from Mindy McConnell, but she does not yet exist, and I will get into that in a bit. So Mork has odd gaps and knowledge about Earth. He knows Richie's name, he knows about Bucko, he knows Richie's address, he knows that Richie is humdrum, but he doesn't know what a pencil is, he doesn't know how to sit properly. One reason he doesn't know about pencils is because he has a multi-purpose finger. It's sort of a bit like modern phones. He can use it to write with, and this is his pointer finger, by the way. And he can immobilize people. There's a range of other abilities as well. He can turn off and disable and reactivate appliances, televisions and jukeboxes and presumably other things he can knock down and just simply open doors. He can destroy buildings, which I will return to. So it's a very versatile finger, and we have not even seen all that it can do. He says that he has come to Earth with the purpose of collecting specimens for assembly on his planet. I don't know if he means that in the sense of like an assembly of like a gathering, or if the specimens will be disassembled and then perhaps reassembled. It's a little ominous, but Richie at this point is just, he's a journalism major, he's curious, he's Scoop Cunningham, he wants to get all this information he can, which is very handy for the audience because then we find out the various facts that we do about Mork. As for the specimen, Richie at first thinks, oh, it's the president, which I think at this point is still Eisenhower. I believe that this episode is set in 1960, for reasons that I will get to shortly. Then Richie wonders if maybe it's Hank Aaron because they're in Wisconsin. But no, it can't be Hank Aaron. He's too famous. Mork is looking for somebody who is average and humdrum. Richie doesn't want to go, understandably, but Mork says it will only take an instant. I think something like Zibada. So Richie is up for it because he's curious and he's an aspiring reporter. This is at least the second lie that Mork will tell Richie in this episode, the first being that he means no harm. So Richie, even though it's only going to take a moment, he wants to bring food and clothing for the journey, and he wonders, well, what would you wear? Obviously, he doesn't have a red spacesuit with silver accessories. Turns out, both men and women are nude on Ork. Apparently, Mork just puts on this spacesuit for travel. I don't know. Richie is excited about the idea of naked women, of course. And then Mork asks if Richie would like to see a picture of him and his girl. This is interesting for many reasons, including the fact that Mork had a girlfriend or something, some sort of relationship with a female back on Ork. And they're still a thing at this point. Of course, Richie, who would not want to see a picture of Mork and his girlfriend, right? So Mork shows it on his hand, I think, like sort of like if you're showing on a phone. It's like maybe his palm has the picture. And Richie can't tell which is which. Mork says this is why they don't need clothes. So, how do they distinguish men and women on his planet? This goes unanswered, perhaps forever, but certainly in this episode. Mork is male, but he does not have either. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. His primary and secondary sexual features are either not noticeable or they are identical to what the females on his planet have. But he is referred to as a spaceman. He's referred to as he. I'm going to go with that for basically the run of the series. But if we get any other indications that gender is even more complex, I will mention that as we go. Richie goes upstairs to pack. I don't know what he's packing. I guess more pencils. And so Mork settles down on the couch, sitting human-like, and watches TV, which he has blasted and then reactivated. And Mork is watching The Andy Griffith Show, which began on October 3rd, 1960. And Richie had graduated as the class of 59 the previous season. So it should probably be winter or spring 1960, but, compared to other anachronisms, close enough. So he's watching Andy Griffith's Show, and we get another acknowledgement of Mork's curiosity and interest in Earth pop culture here, where he says he likes that boy Opie, but wonders why he has a Martian name. It's not clear if Mork has seen the Andy Griffith Show before, but he's already a fan. We also learn, while he's alone, that he likes to eat flowers. This will carry over to the main series. Later, he'll inform Richie's family that he finds feathers fattening. We will also learn in that scene that he likes to drink an Orkan soft drink called Pinji, which comes in 5 delicious flavors: Taz, Ma, Shizba, Baba, and Shishwani. So far in the episode, we've seen his effect on appliances, and then we learn that he wasn't kidding. He was not lying when he said he can immobilize people, because he immobilizes Richie's parents and sister. This is for an unspecified time, because we don't actually go back to Richie's house during the dream portion. It's unclear whether they would be frozen for the entire bleem, or if it would wear off and they'd wake up to find their son and brother is missing and presumably kidnapped by this weird fraternity guy from O-R-K, Omega Rho Kappa. 3 people immobilized is pretty impressive, but then when Richie finds out just how long Mork is going to take him away for, he runs off to Arnold's, which is not a great hiding place if Mork has been studying Richie well enough. And besides the fact, I think he mentioned Arnold's earlier. Richie is in a panic mode and is not thinking too clearly. He goes into Arnold's and immobilizes everybody in the place except Richie. And again, for an unclear amount of time. The reason why Richie runs off is because that moment is actually a bleem, which is 2,000 years. And I think that also comes up in the main series. When he runs off, Mork says no one has ever escaped from Mork, which implies he has been kidnapping a heck of a lot of people. Richie runs down to Arnold's, finds Fonzie in Fonzie's office, which of course is the men's restroom, and Fonzie is still skeptical about this whole flying saucer thing. Mork decides to challenge Fonzie to a holly-tacker, which is helpfully defined as a challenge. We could have figured that out from context clues, but that's okay. His own vocabulary continues to be sporadic. When he hears the word rumble, he thinks of the dance, rumba, which he demonstrates. Mork has been challenged on 200 planets, and he is undefeated. But he views Fonzie as a worthy opponent, because when he tries to immobilize Fonzie, through the power of his thumb, manages to shake it off in about a minute. And so Mork is very impressed, and the holotacker is going to happen. They have a series of little contests, mini holotackers, I don't know the term. And so Mork turns on the jukebox, but of course, anybody who knows the Fonzie lore knows that's something Fonzie can do. And when Fonzie manages to get an immobilized woman to kiss him, which is another... That sounds strange, but that's another Fonzie skill. Not usually that they're immobilized, but he can get women to kiss him. Mork wants to try this as well, so he animates Chachi out of the way, strips Ralph to his underwear and socks and shoes, and then tries to get a girl to kiss him, but he instead has to ward off Potsy. So Mork is maybe, by some definitions, heterosexual. Or at least he's not attracted to Potsy, which is understandable, but it's a cheap laugh. Then Mork and the Fonz, the thumb versus the finger, have target practice with poor Al, who has taken over Arnold's. Mostly this is a tie so far. And, I mean, technically I think Fonzie's ahead, but, you know, the close enough. Mork decides that he will take it to the next plateau.
Hey, wait a minute, what are you talking about? The whole building collapsing.
It's fantastic. Screams, Technicolor, everything.
Everything. So again, he knows what Technicolor is. He cheerfully says that a few people might die. I'm not going to go too much into this right now, but the Mork of his own series is a pacifist. He has specific reasons he does not want to fight. When he fights, it is reluctantly. He is not a psychopathic killer. This is just too much for the Fonz. You know, these little contests and everything are pretty harmless. I mean, poor Ralph is running down the street in his underwear and shoes. But, you know, it might be raining, but it's probably not that cold out. And he's Ralph. He can streak. Nobody's really going to think any less of him. And Mork just has no regrets about the possible destruction and death. And personally, he's got a stellar force field of protection. This is just too much for the Fonz, and he just says, you know what, you win. And instead of Mork triumphing, he says this is the best contest that he has had in 20 bleems. That is 40,000 years. I will get into the whole Orkan aging process as we go along, but this means at a minimum, Mork is 40,000 years old. He may have been doing hollytackers for 40,000 years, so maybe he's 60,000, somewhere in there. He's touched by Fonzie's concern for his earthling friends. This is not an emotion he's familiar with. We'll later learn there are many emotions he's not familiar with, but he kind of likes it, which is not something Orkans are supposed to do.
Funny thing, this warmth. We don't have it on Earth. We tried it once a long time ago, didn't work. Overpopulation.
Yes, another sex joke. Right on. They actually are aware of compassion and friendship on Ork, but it's kind of an ancient, distant memory. Probably bleems and bleems and millibleems. Well, it wouldn't be millibleems. It would multi-bleems ago. And he salutes Fonz by saying, I tap my kripla to you, sir. And he squeaks his nose. Happy ending, right? No. Because now he's going to kidnap the Fonz instead of Richie. But not for specimen reasons, because of course the Fonz is in humdrum. No, he thinks that Ork can use Fonzie as their new champion. I guess he's going to retire, you know, after 40,000 years. He's probably eligible. And even though Fonzie shook off the immobilization earlier, now perhaps weakened by their holotacker, he is immobilized and animated, and while Richie protests, Mork starts to lead Fonzie out in slow motion. Richie is understandably upset. This is his best friend who has just stood up for him for one of many times. And then it all turns out to be a dream. Or was it? Richie's father says, "When I was your age, I used to dream about girls." So if this is a dream, and if you believe that everyone in a dream represents an aspect of the dreamer, what does Mork represent? Is he the side of Richie that wants adventure? Is it the side of Richie that is heartless, almost unemotional? The side, his evil side that he cannot express in his everyday humdrum life? Does he view himself as sexless? What is Mork? Well, before we can ponder this, a man shows up at the door who looks just like Mork, but he's in ordinary late 50s clothes and has a vaguely southern accent. He's simply looking for directions. He finds Richie to be kind of weird, and he politely leaves. This is a good time to mention that My Favorite Martian, from which this takes its title, ran from 1963 to 1966. The title character was played by Ray Walston, which would, in a couple years from now, become very ironic. On My Favorite Martian, Uncle Martin is passed off as Bill Bixby's uncle, and he gets into various shenanigans, and it ran for 3 years. This is just one episode in Richie Cunningham's long saga. It is in some ways not as strange as Chachi dreaming of selling his soul to the devil. Actually, it's the devil's nephew. Having the devil's nephew team up against Fonzie and an angel who would also get his own spin-off, but that's another story. Unsuccessful spin-off, of course. In the Happy Days 11 season run, I don't know that this would have really stood out if not for the casting of Robin Williams, who just came in and lit the place up to the point that Ron Howard and Henry Winkler knew they were in the presence of a star being born. Robin just had that magic, and you can see it here. But if I'm rating it as a Mork and Mindy episode or prototype, I have to give it 2 eggs because Mork is a psychopathic killer, and Mindy at this point is non-existent as a concept, but in the Marshallverse she would be roughly 3 years old, living in Colorado, which admittedly is not much further to go than Milwaukee, Wisconsin, compared to traveling whatever distance it is from Ork, and I believe we'll find out later what that distance is, sort of. This is not Mork and Mindy. This is the introduction of Mork. And it's all a dream anyway. And although Mork is the center of the episode, he's not in the tag. There's more attention there paid to some quiz that Ralph and Richie took, and the Hooper triplets' new sweaters are more impressive than an alien. So 2 eggs out of 4. I will also, when we get to the series proper, start talking about what rating I give to each episode on a shipping scale, and that is how viable is the relationship, the romantic relationship of Mork and Mindy as a couple. And I have to give this a -1 because of those reasons that Mindy is non-existent, or she's a preschooler in another state, and Mork is a psychopathic killer. Neither of them should be in a romantic relationship at this point. When we see them together, it will be approximately 18 years later in the Marshallverse. So things will be more promising, but it's not an instant relationship by any means. We'll get into that. This has been Paula Schaffner with episode 0 of Becoming Human. Thank you for listening. Nanu nanu.
Looks like a purple people eater to me. It was a